Well, good evening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me this evening for this third episode of the series, This Present Darkness. Tonight, we are talking about something that so many people find endlessly fascinating, and that is something called spirit release therapy. And spirit release therapy is part of the whole universe of spirit and demonic attachment, possession, exorcism, and all of that. We're going to have a lot of episodes where we talk about things related to spirit and demonic possession and exorcism. But tonight specifically, I want to talk about spirit release therapy. This is just one very specific kind of process or kind of therapy specifically, and that has to do with this whole world of spirit and demonic possession. And I wanted to talk to you about this because it has a lot to do with my decision to discontinue doing paranormal investigation for fun, or doing, events that were focused on paranormal investigation. And I have really come to understand deeply the dangers of paranormal investigation, and dabbling in the occult and all the things that a lot of the times that you'll hear experts caution against. I kind of always thought about these things. I heard them and I thought, oh well, I know what I'm doing, I know this, I know how to do this and deal with this and protect myself against this, but I was wrong essentially. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my own experience with spirit release therapy, something that I do not recommend. But and I'm going to tell you why also, several reasons why. But before I talk to you about my own experience with spirit release therapy, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about spirit release therapy in general, and kind of the history of spirit release therapy, and the different researchers and practitioners that have distinguished themselves in the field of spirit release therapy. So I want to talk to you first a little bit about those. So without further ado, I'm going to just open up some slides so that I can show you some pictures of these folks that I am talking about as I speak. And so before we go into this, I wanted to just distinguish exactly what spirit release therapy is and what it is not. Okay, so and to talk about that, I want to first just mention a little bit about deliverance and exorcism. You've probably heard a lot of people talk about deliverance and deliverance prayers, deliverance ministry, and of course you've all heard the term, exorcism, and of course possession. Deliverance is different from exorcism. Exorcism is, and especially according to the Catholic Church, is what we call a solemn exorcism, the kind of exorcism, where the priest actually goes in and helps the person who is possessed by performing the official rite of the church, the exorcism rite of the church. This is called a solemn exorcism. And this is different from just a plain old exorcism, which can take many forms. For example, a house blessing, baptism, many other kinds of things that we do every day can be these, minor exorcisms, as opposed to the solemn exorcism or major exorcism. And so we have, deliverance prayers that are said all the time. Some of them by priests during, for example, during baptism or during a house blessing. But there are also many prayers that can be said by members of the laity, just people who are not ordained. And the difference between these prayers and these methods is that in deliverance prayers that are said by the laity, by people who are not ordained priests, the person saying the prayers does not speak to the spirit or the demon. The person saying the prayers appeals to God, Jesus, divine beings. for relief for this person. So the person saying the prayers is calling for the mercy of God on the person who is possessed or has the spiritual issue. Whereas in the solemn exorcism that is done by, or the rite of exorcism, which is done by only by an ordained priest, and only an ordained priest who has been appointed as an exorcist by a bishop, only an exorcist can directly speak to a demon and confront a demon. And even in the exorcism, there are very strict rules about how this engagement can happen, on what terms and to what extent. There's very little, there's very little dialogue between the priest and the demon or demons. There are only very specific reasons why the priest engages in conversation, and that is, to find out what the point of entry was for the demon and to find out the demon's name, which is very important for getting rid of the demonic presence that's there. But anyway, I just wanted to point out, we're not going to be talking actually about possession and exorcism too much tonight, because we're talking about something that concerns primarily human spirits and the attachment by human spirits. So we're going to be talking about this at another time, but I just wanted to point out this difference between deliverance and exorcism, because I will be making mentions of these two terms probably in this segment. So let's move on. Basically, what is spirit attachment, and so what is spiritual or spirit release therapy? Well, spirit release therapy, and here's the definition, is a clinical treatment sometimes used with patients who appear to be possessed by a harmful spirit entity. I want to make sure that I am, excuse me 1 second. I just want to make sure that I am sharing my screen, which I don't think I am right now. So let me get back in here and do that. Okay, share screen. There we go. Okay. So there we go. Better. All right. So spirit release therapy is a clinical treatment sometimes used with patients who appear to be possessed by a harmful spirit entity and who have not responded to conventional psychotherapy or psychiatric methods. So this kind of therapy, again, it's a clinical treatment. So this is done by psychiatrists, psychologists, and other, therapeutic clinicians who they decide basically, and most of these, those who use this kind of treatment are not convinced about the reality of what they're actually treating or what it's saying. So basically, spirit release therapy is going on the idea that a person is being affected, basically being possessed by a discarnate entity, another spirit. And sometimes it can be a human spirit, and sometimes it can be what Catholics would call a demon, but what in modern terms and clinical terms people will refer to as a dark force entity or a DFE. Same thing. It's just, you gotta have a different word though, right? It's very interesting because many of the practitioners of spirit release therapy, have come to just embrace this therapy because they've found that by accepting this idea that their patient is actually possessed by a spirit, they have had a lot of success in helping the patient to rid themselves of this spirit attachment. But again, many of these practitioners are not actually convinced, and some of them outright don't believe that it's a spirit that's causing the difficulties, but they do know that their patients are not responding that certain patients are not responding to traditional methods of psychotherapy and things like this, and they have found success in using spirit release therapy to help them. Now, there have been a lot of different researchers who have worked on in the field of spirit release therapy. So I just want to share with you some of them and some of their different ideas. Let's go back just for a second here, though. There are a lot of different specific definitions of spirit release therapy, depending on who the practitioner is. This is a simple definition, and it says that the consciousness, the spirit that can be, invading the person, the human person, living person, could be the spirit of a deceased person, a non-human destructive entity, again, demons or dark force entity, depending on whether you're religious or not, negative thought forms created by the host, the person who's being harmed, or other living persons, or intergenerational curses, elementals, things like fairies, things like that, or alien life forms and other entities. So it addresses all of these different ones. Now, I want to point out here that most of these practitioners will tell you right out that if you do have what we would call a demon, or some therapists would call a dark force entity that's attached to you, this therapy will not help, which is, excuse me. Sorry, got a bad cough going on. They will tell you that this therapy is not effective, which is very interesting, because you can do all the deliverance prayers in the world, up and down the hall, shout them from the rooftops. But if you have a demonic entity that has gotten to the point of possessing you, none of these deliverance prayers are going to work. You have to call in the big guns and get the exorcist, get the priest. So the therapist or the SRT practitioner aims to uncover the type of spirit or spirits that are affecting the patients. And the spirit is often referred to as a disembodied consciousness. And again, it's they're trying to find out whether they think it's a disembodied human spirit or if it's like some kind of thought form that the person has come up with. And a lot of therapists also talk about the possibility that when we talk about dissociative disorder or, split personalities, that these could be parts of our own consciousness, that, we think these are parts of our own consciousness, but these could be discarnate entities of a different kind. Or these detached parts of our own consciousness could have gotten to the point where they're actually these entities of their own, which is why they believe a lot of people don't respond to these traditional therapies. So let's talk about the different people who have been involved with this. The gentleman that you see on your screen here was one of the earliest practitioners and researchers into the idea of SRT, and that was James Hyslop. And this was his book had the first published reference to the treatment method now known as spirit release therapy. And he was a professor of logic and ethics at Columbia University from 1889 to 1902, so well over 100 years ago. He became an active investigator of psychic phenomena and was the president of the American Society for Psychical Research, which, as you know, was a very prestigious organization at the time. And he would use the term obsession in the context of SRT. And this is a term that we get actually from Catholic exorcism when we talk. This is this is the final stage of a demon taking over a person before possession. So, and it shares a lot of the kind of the hallmarks or the characteristics or symptoms, if you will, of possession. So obsession is a term from Catholic theology that has come into this clinical area of SRT work. Now, Dr. Hyslop said every single case of dissociation and paranoia to which I have applied cross-reference has yielded to the method of SRT and proved the existence of foreign agencies. So he's saying that every case of dissociation and paranoia that he has studied in the context of SRT has proven to him that there are these foreign entities that are taking control of people's bodies, living people's bodies. Okay. All right. Next is a gentleman named Carl Wicklund, and this is actually his wife. And I have his wife up here because she was very instrumental in his involvement in SRT, because the way his involvement with it started was that he was an MD. I'm sorry, he was a medical student who was studying to be a doctor, and he was dissecting a corpse one day. And he came home from school, and his wife, who pictured here, who was a medium, she claimed to be able to speak to the dead. She suddenly went into this trance when he walked in the door, and she became very faint, and her husband helped her into a chair, and sitting there, he heard this male voice coming from his wife's body, and it said, "What do you mean by cutting me?" And he came to find, in talking to his wife further while she was in this trance, that this voice claimed to be the spirit of this corpse, disembodied corpse that he had been dissecting at medical school earlier that day. So he and his wife became involved in, they became just entranced by this idea of discarnate entities being able to take over someone's body or still being present, after death. And he talked famously about a case that really struck him, where this woman became just sort of this accidental target of these quarreling spirits whose arguments with each other continued until after, or appeared to continue after their death. Okay, so he says, one summer evening, we were called to the home of Mrs. M, a lady of culture and refinement. She was a musician of high rank, and when the social demands made upon her proved too great, she suffered a nervous breakdown. She had become intractable, and for 6 weeks had been in such a raving condition that her physicians had been unable to relieve her, and day and night nurses were in constant attendance. We found the patient sitting up in bed, crying one minute like a forlorn child, and again screaming in fear, "Matilda, Matilda." Then suddenly fighting and struggling, she would talk a wild gibberish of English and Spanish, the latter a language of which she had no knowledge. Mrs. Wickland immediately gave her a psychic diagnosis, saying that the case was unquestionably one of obsession. Here's that term again. And this was unexpectedly confirmed when Mrs. Wickland, who was standing at the foot of the bed with wraps on and ready to leave, was found to be suddenly entranced. We placed her on a davenport in the music room, where for 2 hours I talked in turn with several spirits who had just been attracted from the patient. I think this probably means like that she had discerned there were several spirits that were attached to her. There were 3 spirits, claimed Mrs. Wickland, a girl named Mary, her suitor, who was an American, and his Mexican rival, this Matilla. Both of the men had vehemently loved the girl and just as fiercely hated each other. In a jealous rage, one had killed the girl, and then in a desperate fight, the 2 rivals had killed each other. So all of these 3 were unaware of being dead, they claimed, although Mary said, the victim. I thought they were going to kill each other, but here they are still fighting and they're already dead. This tragedy of love, hatred, and jealousy had not ended with physical death. The group had unconsciously been drawn into the psychic atmosphere of the patient, and the violent fighting had continued within her aura. Since her nervous resistance was exceedingly low at this time, one after the other had usurped her physical body, with a resulting disturbance that was unexplainable by her attendants. And a lot of people who practice this, they have different ideas about why certain people are targeted in this way. Some say the person is just like psychically weak, maybe physically weak. Their, defenses are worn down. Some people say, like, when you visit places where these tragedies have happened and these spirits are still around there, they can attach themselves to a living person that comes by. We hear this a lot from mediums and things like that, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Another researcher who did a lot of work in this area was a Benedictine monk by the name of Adam Crabtree. And Crabtree was even more than a monk. He was very scientific minded, and a lot of his work is very much respected by scientific minded laity as well. And he writes a lot about the similarities between possession and mental illnesses like, multiple personality disorder. Then there's a lot of qualities of both of these situations that are identical to one another. Now, the person, there's one more person before I talk about her. A woman named Irene Hickman was a psychiatrist, and she had her first work was mind probe hypnosis. She was a hypnotist too, of course. And she was a student of another gentleman named William Baldwin, who did a lot of research into what they called remote possession. And this was this idea that, remote depossession. And this is the idea that that a practitioner can remotely remove these spirits from the patient, and that in fact that it's desirable to have no contact with the patient when you're doing this kind of therapy. And that's the kind of therapy that I did, which I'm going to tell you about. So the person that I really became that made me aware of this whole kind of therapy was not the person who did my remote spirit release therapy, but this woman whose book I read many years ago now, probably 25 years ago, when I first started out as towards the beginning of when I first started, I'm probably 30 years ago now, as a paranormal investigator. And that's this book on your screen, The Unquiet Dead. And here's the author, Dr. Edith Fiore. Dr. Edith Fiore was a psychiatrist, and she was also a hypnotherapist. And she used hypnotherapy in a lot of her therapy of her patients or clients. She came to believe that 75% of the thousands of patients that she saw during her career were possessed by these discarnate entities. And I don't think she ever really decided whether they were actually, disembodied spirits or what they were, if they were thought forms, or if the patient just thought that they were possessed by a spirit. But I was fascinated by this book when I first read it, because, I must have been about 25 years ago now, because I think I was dating my husband at the time, and he was a firefighter and a paramedic. And in the book, she talks a lot about how she would be speaking to her patients in hypnotherapy, and these other voices would come through, and they would claim to be other people. And this was how she first discovered this idea of spirit attachment, or this idea of spirit possession in a clinical way. And all of these people that she talked to, there was some situation where the person, the the living person had been vulnerable to possession by spirit. Oftentimes the living person had been hospitalized for some reason, and the spirit was roaming around the hospital and took over the body of the living person, just looking for somewhere to go. Many times there had been an accident, and it was someone who was at the scene of the accident whose body was taken over by this suddenly wandering spirit who had just died in the accident. She found that a lot of first responders, such as firefighters and paramedics and police officers, and also the surgeons that would work on accident victims, were very much prone to this spirit possession by these suddenly discarded entities that had died, accidentally or suddenly. So this book is very influential on me, and I found myself recommending it to people over and over and over and over and over again during my career. The most recommended book probably that I have recommended over these many years. Now I find it interesting. I recommend it to people read it because it's very interesting, but I do have a lot of warnings about it too, which I will talk about. So these are some of the people that have been influential and very much involved in spirit release therapy and have added their own ideas. But this is a gentleman who I actually went to when I felt it was imperative for me to undergo this kind of therapy. And this was in December of 2019. And this is a man by the name of Dr. Terence Palmer, who literally just passed away a few months ago. And his book, The Science of Spirit Possession, is probably the number one, contemporary book on this phenomenon, if you call it, and this kind of therapy. And Dr. Palmer is a very respected, very prestigious academic. He's from England. He has done work all over the world. He's won all sorts of prizes and fellowships. And this is because the work that he did convinced a lot of, sort of non-believing clinicians and doctors, MDs, surgeons, people in running hospitals all over the world, that this stuff is for real. And they found that their patients who were very resistant to all sorts of traditional treatments for their so-called mental illnesses immediately often would respond to spirit release therapy, where all of their problems would suddenly be gone after they underwent this kind of therapy. So here's what happened to me that led me to seek Dr. Palmer's help. As some of you guys may know, my mother passed away in 2018, and she was 90, almost 91 years old. She was a school teacher for many years. She was a very tough, strong woman. She lived by herself after my father's death in 1986 for many years. And was very active. She had a fall, like so many elderly people do, in late November, December of 2017. And after that fall, she was not able to do anything for herself. She was already legally blind, which was a big problem. I live like 2 blocks away from her, and literally sometimes 10 times a day, she would call me to come over and, dial the phone for her, read the back of a box of something, or write a letter, address an envelope or something like that, because she couldn't see anything. And she also couldn't hear either. But this fall led her to not being able to walk by herself. She ended up we did a lot of care with her, where I was over there every day. My husband was over there every day. My daughter would eventually moved in with her, as did my husband, to care for her. But it was very, very difficult. So she was very ill. And she also had a lot of urinary tract infections because she had part-time caregivers that didn't properly care for her hygiene. So it was rough, really rough. But during that year or those last few years when she was blind and I had to really do a lot of her bills and everything for her, I began to discover that her trustee, who I was also related to, had been financially taking advantage of her for many years. and tried to reason with her and get her to see this. And it was very, very difficult, needless to say, and it got worse and worse and worse. At any rate, my mom had a trust that said that after her death, I could live in her house and pay half the mortgage, and the trustee was to pay half the mortgage as well. Well, when she passed away, I was kind of like locked out of the house, and the trustee refused to pay his share, and I had to go to court, get a lawyer and fight for what my mom had left to me, and all that lawyer stuff. It almost exhausted what was left in her estate after it had been kind of trashed by the trustee. And so what happened was that, I ended up with this kind of like everything that I had thought about, like my family and, what was going on and everything else. And also that, that my mom thought for years that I was going to live in her house after she passed away and care for it. She loved her house so much. I loved it. Her great uncle had built the house. It was more than even a house. It was a family, estate, treasure, heirloom, if you will. And so it was devastating, because here I am, I was 50 years old, and all of a sudden, everything that I thought for my whole life, it was just pulled out from under me. And here I had lost my dad, my mom, I had lost my half brother. I no longer spoke to another family member because of this. So I lost like everything, and I lost this sense of everything that I had had for so long. And I didn't realize this at the time. We always hear about the list of the ways that evil spirits and the devil can enter our lives. We know it through the occult, practicing the occult, consulting mediums, using Ouija boards and all this sort of thing. We know that's a big way. Addiction, alcoholism, drug addiction. And we're going to talk about this a lot in the future, specifically. But what I didn't know is that one of the big ways that negative spirits, demons, can come into our lives is through a broken heart. In one way, for example, if someone that you really love and care about betrays you or dies or something like that, that can happen. There was one case that an exorcist talked about in which a woman had been engaged for several years, and like 2 days before her wedding, he broke up with her and left and went off with someone else. And she ended up becoming possessed by a demon because of this. Interesting, isn't it? But also when your whole worldview, the way you understand everything, your family, your relationships, the way things are going to be, your plans, like that bride had those plans. When things like that are suddenly overturned, and the rug's pulled out from under you, this can open the door to demonic possession or, obsession, something that's on like a lower level spirit attachment to yourself. So after my mom passed away and all of this came to play out, in the courts with the lawyers, and I lost the house and all of this, it was gradually I started to feel that there was something wrong with me. I have struggled with depression in the past. Some of you might know, I have bipolar type 2. I've had a couple episodes of depression in my life, mostly of something that's called hypomania, where I just do a lot of activity at one time. A lot of artists and writers have it, where we just like are constantly like doing creative things and we can't turn it off. That's mostly what I suffer from. And sometimes that turns into like compulsive cleaning and other things like that, but nothing too severe with me. It's not, type 1. And I haven't had a lot of depressive episodes, but I went through a terrible depression after my mom passed away. And coupled with all of these revelations that I had had, I think it really led me to the brink of what we would call spirit possession, where I was in the state of what we call obsession. It's a state right before demonic possession, where there was something seriously wrong with me, and I had a major spirit attachment that was literally sucking like everything out of me and changing me. And I knew that there was something really wrong because I went to, and I found this out later, I went to the hospital to visit my aunt, my mom's sister, who had cancer, and she had gone through a lot of cancer treatments, but she was in the hospital right before New Year's that year at the end of 2019. And she did end up passing away on New Year's Eve. But I went to the hospital to visit her. And I later found out, after my cousin found out, her daughter found out, that I had gone through this spirit release therapy. She told me that when I had come to the hospital that night, she had almost asked me to leave because there was something so off about me. And it wasn't anything that I was doing, nothing I was saying, no way that I was acting that she could put her finger on. There was just something eerie and off about me that made her so uncomfortable that she didn't want me there. Interesting, isn't it? So I knew that there was something wrong with me, and I knew I wasn't possessed because I know well what those what a person who is possessed, what the person acts like. And but I knew there was something deeply spiritually wrong with me. And at that time, I still wasn't aware of all the dangers of doing sort of non-religious treatments, you might call them, for these kinds of spiritual ailments. And so I had heard about this gentleman before because, as you might know, I'm still kind of associated with the field of parapsychology, and I sometimes do journal articles and stuff like that in parapsychology. And I'm very interested in the parapsychology field. And I'd heard about this gentleman, Dr. Terence Palmer, and I knew that he did this kind of therapy. And I looked into it, but I was very wary about it because I had looked into other different kinds of spirit release therapies or processes, and I rejected them for a specific reason. And that is that these therapies or these processes did not, of course, they didn't involve priests, and they also didn't invoke God. A lot of times you'll run into like mediums, for example, that are paranormal investigators that will go into places where there seem to be spirits, and they will talk to the spirits and tell the spirits to leave, that they need to leave. As Catholics, we are forbidden from doing this. We are not to speak to spirits on our own. This is because of the high probability that they are not human spirits, but demonic spirits who are lying and pretending to be human spirits. So we are not to engage with demonic spirits. So we avoid talking to any spirits for this reason, because we don't want to get involved with demons. So we should not be doing things like this. Mediums should not be trying to talk to spirits and move them along to the light or whatever. So I rejected that. I didn't want to talk to any mediums about what was going on with me, even though before that I actually had talked to mediums before who had been at events of mine or friends of mine, and I totally respect them. I also respect their abilities. I just don't know what they're actually talking to, if they're actually talking to human spirits or talking to something else, which I wasn't really aware of before about how dangerous that can be. So mediums had suggested to me that there was something that was attached to me. In particular, for a medium friend of mine told me that there was just kind of a nasty character who was smoking a lot, and he was attached to me, which was interesting because a lot of times people would smell smoke around me. And I haven't smoked for many, 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 many years. So that was interesting. But I knew I didn't want to seek out the help of a medium. I also had heard that shamans will often do this kind of work. A shaman is someone who is able to discern the spirits and speak to them. And they're sort of like, kind of like hostage negotiators with the spirit world. Like they will talk to the spirit and get them to leave the person that they're attached to. You never want to do something like this because this does not involve God. And if you're negotiating with something to leave someone, you don't negotiate with these discarnate spirits or these these entities, because these could be demons. You do not want to negotiate with demons, because whenever a demon does something to cooperate with you, you're going to have to give something in return. And oftentimes that's going to be your soul, your life, whatever. It's going to be something really bad. And you may not actually have, you may not sign the book, like we hear about in folklore and things like that. It might be an unspoken agreement on the terms of the devil, and you never know what those terms are. Therefore, you never engage in things where you're getting something from the spirit world and that's not directly from God, an answer to prayers to God. You're not, you don't want to talk to the universe. You don't want to talk to fairies. You don't want to talk to elementals. You don't want to talk to disembodied spirits and negotiate, because you do not know what you're negotiating with, and you do not know what the terms of that deal are. The same things with, tarot cards or consulting with psychics and things like that. You might get some good information that helps you. You think it helps you, but you're going to pay for that information a lot more than you paid the psychic or the tarot card reader. Trust me. So I was attracted to the work that Dr. Palmer's team was doing, because let me just tell you really quickly what his methodology was. I told you he recently passed away. In the methodology that he used, he would use a medium, so someone who claimed to be able to see and speak to spirits, and what he called a facilitator. This was someone who would kind of walk the medium through these different protocols. It was like a checklist they would check off, and there involved a lot of things from like the New Age movement, like chakras and, astral, the higher consciousness, lower consciousness, and cleansing of all these different things. But essentially what they were trying to do is to see if there were spirit beings attached to the person and to get the spirits to move on. Now, essential to all of these spirit release therapies is that they're very opposed to the church idea, the Catholic Church idea of confronting with authority whatever these beings are and telling them, assuming that they're evil and telling them to get out, basically. So it really does come down to a kind of a negotiation. You're reasoning with the spirit, you're telling the spirit that it's harming the person and encouraging the spirit to move on. And so it's very different from Catholic deliverance prayers and exorcisms that are confronting a demonic entity with the authority of the church and telling it to get out. So it's very different. Sometimes people refer to it as like a gentle exorcism. There's no such thing as a gentle exorcism. But I was attracted to Dr. Palmer because his mediums did not directly speak to the demons that were encountered. They would the mediums claimed to be able to distinguish between these, earthbound spirits, human spirits who had passed away and were attached to the person, these energy forms or thought forms or parts of ourselves that had been kind of like broken off of ourselves at some point of our life due to trauma or addiction or something like that, that had actually become like entities in of themselves that were destroying our lives. And these demonic energies with entities, which they call, of course, dark force energies. So they're able to distinguish between, basically the demons and the other things. And when they get to one of the demons, they don't confront it on their own. Rather, they call angels to do that, to come and kind of capture the demonic or the dark force energy entity and to take it away to wherever they're supposed to be. And oftentimes it's very funny because, angels are spiritual beings. I mean, spiritual with a capital S, they're involved with, God and the church and everything else. And these practitioners have no problem with calling angels to help them, but they don't invoke God. It's very weird. I find it very strange. Doesn't really make any sense. At any rate, I rationalized that, okay, I could do this therapy because the mediums weren't actually speaking directly to the demons, right, that they would encounter. And angels were involved. Oftentimes Saint Michael would actually come himself to help get rid of really nasty dark force energies. So I thought, okay, well, this sounds like it's okay. Like I can do this. And I was wrong. It's not okay. I'll get to that in a minute. So this is kind of what happened. So like I said, it's remote. So it's not like you're going in to talk to you're not going in to talk to a therapist and go through this process. You're not, being hypnotized or anything like that to get rid of these things. You're not being put under, you're not having anything done face to face, or even, kind of like remotely through like Zoom or a telephone call or something like that. So rather what you're doing is the medium and the facilitator are doing the therapy on you remotely. In this case, I believe might have been actually in England where this was done to me. So I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was happening. I just knew that it was going to happen. Dr. Palmer, the medium, the facilitator, didn't know anything about me, nothing about me at all. So I went through this, and it was weird. Like after it happened, I definitely felt different. I felt like a lot of things had been lifted off of me, whether this was psychosomatic or not. I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever know. But I want to read to you. The team, actually, they record the whole session. So they actually send you the recording of the whole session, which is fascinating because you hear the medium ostensibly going through this etheric world of spirits and identifying all of these different spirits that are attached to you, and then getting rid of them with the help, sometimes the help of the angels. So it's very fascinating, but I'm not going to play that for you, but I'm going to tell you, read to you the email that Dr. Palmer sent me, just kind of to sum up what they had done to help me. Dear, and this is from Sunday, December 29th, 2019. Dear Ursula, we have conducted a remote spirit release procedure for you in response to your recent request, and these are our findings. Negative spirit entities attached to your outer etheric body have been removed by spirit guides. Your grounding with the planet was partial and has now been reinforced, so you should begin to feel better connected with your surroundings. Negative energy has been cleared from within your inner etheric body, and all blocked chakras have been reopened to permit the free flow of positive energy through the body. Interdimensional parasites have been cleared away, and all have been closed, and interdimensional portals around your person and home have been closed and sealed to prevent further intrusions. A large group of earthbound spirits was found attached and were released to the light. One dissociated subpersonality has been reintegrated with the core self, so you should begin to feel more complete with yourself. You should now be feeling the benefits of our intervention, and the spirit guide suggested that you would benefit by paying closer attention to psychic self-protection. So it's really interesting. So basically what he said was that they found a lot of just negative energy attached to me that was like kind of got into my inner being. There were negative spirits, entities attached to my outer body. So it seems like kind of like demonic spirits were sort of just hanging around in the general area, which is causing trouble. A large group of earthbound spirits was found attached and released. This might have been from all of the haunted places that I had been to. Maybe I brought the spirits home with me. I don't know. Or if they were from, we live in a relatively old neighborhood, it might just be that, or even our house. People who visited here in our apartment over the years have said that there are spirits here, or at least were. And then one dissociated subpersonality was reintegrated. And in the recording, I found out what this was. The medium said that when at the time I was about maybe 12 years old, that part of me had come like detached from myself because of some trauma or something that happened in my family. Now, there are two things that happened to me growing up. One was that I was physically abused a lot in my family. And so that it can be like a doorway, open up a doorway for these things to come in to you. I know that for a fact from studying possession and exorcism. So abuse. And then there was a divorce. My mom and dad got divorced. And I never knew this either. Divorce can be a portal, open up a portal for these things too. Anytime the family is broken, the family is a big, family, that's like union between a woman and man with, when they're in, especially when children are present, this unit is like a big, powerful force against demonic oppression and possession, which I never knew before until the last couple of years that I've been studying this. That's why you often hear about, marriage and like traditional marriage and things like that in, traditional church circles and things like that, because it's very closely associated with fighting the demonic. Very interesting. We'll talk more about that too. So did it work? I don't know. Like I said, I felt, a lot better. That downward spiral that I had been on since my mom had passed away and all the stuff had happened. A lot of it seemed to be lifted. My like serious ongoing issues, that I struggle with were still there. They're still here. They claimed that the medium claimed, Dr. Palmer claimed that the medium had asked Saint Michael himself to come and to capture this very dark entity that was attached to me. So basically they were saying there was a very dark demonic entity, powerful demonic entity that was attached to me, and that Saint Michael had come and taken it away, which I found very interesting. So I don't know what happened. It made sense to me that they said that a part of me had kind of broken off from myself when I was younger. They also said that this part of me was afraid to reintegrate with me because it didn't recognize me. And I found that very interesting because of a lot of things that I had done in the last, 20 years, 15 years, that were very unlike, kind of what I was like when I was younger. I feel like at some point, there was some other influence on me that was leading me to do things, like different acts and different behaviors that were very much unlike my true self, who I was when I was younger. And this idea that my younger self was actually afraid to reintegrate with me because essentially didn't recognize me. That made so much sense to me. I thought that was really interesting. I loved the idea of Saint Michael coming to take this demonic entity away from me, but do I think it was really Saint Michael? I don't know. I just don't know. Anyway, let me tell you what I think the problems with this kind of therapy are. The number one problem with all of this is that it invokes, as I said already, no real spiritual authority. Most of the practitioners of spirit release therapy do not invoke God or even recognize God in this process, even though, like I said, they talk about angels and facilitate, the use of angels in a lot of this release therapy, including Saint Michael, the archangel. I find that very strange that there's no recognition of God, no invocation of God, but they do talk to angels and ask for the help of angels. I found that most of the advocates of SRT, and practitioners of SRT seem to be agnostic. Many are students of comparative religion. So they talk a lot about how there's, many cultures talk about spirit possession and spirit release therapy and practice spirit release therapy in some way. Does this make it unsuccessful? Not necessarily. There are many things that we don't know about. A lot of things going on that we don't understand, a lot of functioning in the spirit world that we don't understand how it works. We don't understand, everything that's going on. What I do know from being a student of many prominent exorcists and learning a lot about spirit possession and exorcism is that nothing that you do in this realm where you're going to be involved with spirits, with the spirit world, nothing you should do you should not do anything with having God go before you, so prayer and fasting and focusing everything on God and asking for God's help, asking for God's mercy, asking for God's intervention in it. Everything has to be done in the name of God and with the help of God. Otherwise, you don't know where you're getting the help from. And that's a very simple way to look at it. If you are not asking God to do the thing for you, something else is going to help you. And then you are going to have to answer to that person. You're going to have to pay for what was done for you. So I hope that makes sense. The thing about, using the angels, talking to the angels, but not talking God is very strange. I find it so funny that also they use a lot of the same terms that Catholic exorcists will use, such as possession, obsession. They talk about, the dark force entities possess you, but the human spirits and the other spirits obsess you. And that's exactly what the Catholic Church says, that obsession is right before possession, and obsession can, have a lot of the same hallmarks as possession, but it's not quite there where you're completely under the control of the demon or the spirit. They also often will encourage you to protect yourself after you go through the therapy and you have the spirit release. They will strongly suggest, quote unquote, protecting yourself against further obsession. And this usually includes things like saying these weird secular prayers that, again, don't invoke God, but they invoke spirit guides, which seem to be angels. But they don't call them angels. Sometimes they will call them angels, and they will even address these secular prayers to Saint Michael, which is also doesn't seem to make any sense. It just doesn't make sense theologically or just in general. It just doesn't seem to make sense. Next, this is so important. This is a big, huge problem with any of this stuff. Whenever you're being involved in the occult, whether you're using a Ouija board or a ghost box, spirit box, dowsing rods, talking to the spirits in your house that you want to go away, undergoing this kind of therapy, you just don't know what you're talking to. Because demons lie, basically demon, if its mouth is moving, it's lying. So you don't know what these entities are. And I'm going to talk to you more about that in just a minute. This is why we should never speak directly to any spirits. And, people say like, I'm having these things happen in my house since my mom passed away. She seems to be leaving me things around the house, or the lights are going on and off or whatever. And they want to know if they can get in touch with her, if they can, talk to her, things like that. It's fine if you want to take a, say like, okay, well, this is my sign that the person is okay. And, recognize that and put it aside. Usually though, when there's a disembodied human spirit, someone who's passed away, that's in your environment, in your house, around you, whatever, or at the place where they died, making trouble, causing noise, making a fat fuss, this person usually is not, wanting to give you a sign that they're okay, which a lot of people think. Oh, it's mom talking to me. It's mom telling me she's okay. It's mom telling me everything's going to be okay. When someone dies, their only concern is going to heaven. And if they're around making noise, hanging around here, like trying to get your attention, probably the only thing they're trying to do and they're concerned with is trying to get to heaven and getting you to say prayers for them so they can get to heaven. The Catholic Church talks about a place called purgatory that most people go to when they die. If you are not good enough to go right to heaven, and that means that you have sinned at all, even if we confess our sins and receive absolution and are forgiven our sins, we still have to kind of pay the debt. There's one great priest, Father Chris Alar at the National Shrine of the Divine Mercy, who says it's like when you hit a baseball through your neighbor's window, when you're a kid, the neighbor forgives you, but you still have to pay for the window, right? So when we die, our sins are forgiven, but we still have to kind of pay for them. We have to be purified before we can go before God and live with him for eternity. So purgatory is this place kind of where we wait until enough people pray for us that we can go to heaven. We can be purified and go to heaven. And so when people die, they're probably not concerned with letting you know they're okay or giving you signs or, playing these weird little games with you, like leaving pennies around the house. Or, I used to say that all the time. Oh, when I find pennies, it's my dad telling me everything's okay. Probably not. At any rate, we should never speak to spirits because we just don't know what they are. So even if, you think mom's hanging around after she passed away because you're hearing footsteps in her bedroom, something that happened to me, don't start talking to mom. Pray for mom, have masses said for your mom. Don't hang around the house talking to mom because you don't know if that's mom, and it's probably not mom. So the cure and prevention of this is also without appeal to religious authority. Like, they talk about going to the light and protecting yourself with the light and the spirit guides protecting you. But there's no appeal to, for example, the watcher angels, our guardian angels that were sent here by God specifically for this purpose, to protect us. We're not told to talk to them. We're not told to talk to God to ask for his protection. We're not told to ask the saints for their intercession for protection. The Catholic Church will tell us that to guard against these kinds of attachments by whatever these spirits are, we should not sin, remain in the state of grace, don't sin, be in God's grace, be in good relationship with God, receive the sacraments, go to confession, receive the Holy Eucharist, do all of those things that keep you very close to God, because that's what this is all about. Whenever we're open to these spirit attachments or possessions, it's because we have some kind of fracture in a relationship with God. And again, we're going to talk a lot more about all of this. So I wanted to talk to you very quickly to finish up about one more person in all of this. And this is this gentleman right here, who you may know. His name is Ralph Sarchi, and he's a former New York City police sergeant. And he is an exorcism assistant. And he was trained by Ed and Lorraine Warren and by the late Jesuit exorcist Malachi Martin. And he's been doing this for many years, since he was young. And he wrote a book called Deliver Us from Evil, which was made into a Hollywood film called Deliver Us from Evil. It's a great movie if you haven't seen it. It's very good. You should see it. So this gentleman here, I can't remember what his name is, but this is the actor who portrayed Ralph in the movie. It's really good portrayal. At any rate, not really friends, you would say, with Ralph Sarchi, but we know each other, and occasionally I will ask him for advice. He used to give these classes on Periscope about religious demonology and exorcism, and I attended some of these classes. They're very good. And he taught me a lot of things that I didn't know about demonology and exorcism. And he really brought home to me this idea that, usually something that we think is a human spirit communicating with us is not a human spirit. It is a demon that is masquerading as a human spirit. And this really came home to me because I reached out to Rolf after my mom passed away because things were going on in her house. Now, some of you who are familiar with me know that I started out as a paranormal investigator because the house that I grew up in, we said it was haunted. We would hear footsteps on the stairs every night coming up from the foyer to the second floor where the bedrooms were. We heard this very frequently for many years until around the time my brother and I started high school. And, my mom was very scientific minded, and I think she didn't want to scare us. So she just said like, oh, it's the house settling or whatever. My dad was a cop. He said, it's spooks, go back to bed, and totally believed it was just a ghost and there's nothing you do about it and didn't matter. No big deal. But this was a big reason why I got involved in the paranormal, because I wanted to understand what had gone on in our house when I was growing up. Something a lot of people don't know about my house growing up, though, was that there were other things that went on, and a lot of them centered around my brother, who had a lot of kind of more intense paranormal experiences. And like he would sometimes hear like the piano playing when there was no one home. He would hear knocking and things like that. Other things that the rest of our family didn't hear. So I don't know if he has some sort of psychic functioning or something like that, more than the rest of us. My dad also did. My dad would see spirits and things like that too, which I'll talk about on another episode too. But when my mom passed away, it had been many years since we heard anything in the house, because we called a priest after my dad passed away, because this activity escalated, or actually the activity had kind of dissipated, but around the time my brother and I started high school. And then like these 4 years later, after there had been really nothing going on, my dad passed away and it started up again. Okay, so we move into the house and all this activity is going on. And over many years, it just kind of peters out. Then nothing happens until my dad dies, and then it starts up again. And it got so bad after a couple of months that we called a priest to come over and bless the house. And we had him over for dinner. We were having dinner before he was going to do the house blessing. And we had to stop the dinner because we heard someone running up and down the hallways upstairs. So we just got up from the table and we went through the house with the priest. And he blessed each room. And that was the end of that, when nothing happened again until my mom passed away. And then when my mom passed away, at that time, my husband and our older daughter had been living in the house taking care of my mom until literally the last week of her life, when we were told that she had around the clock care, which didn't. But so they weren't there for the last few days of my mom's life, but they had been living in there. And after my mom passed away, they had their stuff there. So they were kind of there, and like I would come in and out there too, right after my mom's death. And they would hear things. My husband watched the bathroom door open by itself, and there was no one in the house. My husband heard it sounded like someone was like rummaging around in my old bedroom in the house where my mom had her bookcase. Both of them heard footsteps in the house when they were downstairs, to the point where they each thought the other person was home and was upstairs, but they weren't. This happened on several occasions. There was another occasion when I was over there, when out of curiosity, when I was still doing EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, recording the voices of spirits. Don't do that. It's very dangerous. I recorded what sounded like a feral cat. When I was trying to talk to my mom. I was saying, Mom, are you here? And I would have these responses like of this animal responding to me. So I was really concerned, because I thought, does my mom need help? And we had I don't think we hadn't had the funeral mass yet. So mass hadn't yet been said for my mom. which traditionally, in the Catholic Church, this is to bring the soul to purgatory. If the soul's in purgatory, we have masses said, we give mass cards, where we promise to have a mass said for the person's soul so the person can go to heaven. And but we hadn't had the funeral mass yet when these things were going on in the house. And I was really concerned, and stupid me, I could have had mass said right then, called up a priest and asked them to say mass for my mom, but I didn't know this. I didn't know enough at the time, to put these things together. And I was just concerned. I thought my mom should be in heaven already, and she's still here. So what's wrong? Is she worried about something? Can I help her? What can I do? So I called up Ralph, and he listened to my story, and he said, "That's not your mother." Like, he just instantly said that, after his years of working as an exorcism assistant, he said instantly, "That's not your mother." And I told me that, the stuff that we had heard when we were kids, not a ghost in the house. After my dad passed away and we had to call the priest to bless the house, not my dad. This was not my mother. And it was like, whoa. This was one of the things that led me to realize there was something much deeper that was going on in my life, and had been for my entire life. And I thought about all the things that had happened to me, like abuse, and I had gotten involved in, alcohol addiction and things like this. And I was like, has there been something going on in my life since my parents bought that house back in the 1960s, the house where, I was brought when I was born? Was there some influence on me all this time that's led up to this moment, when it all seems to be coming to a head? And I started to remember something that Ralph had taught in one of his classes. And he teaches this class about something called the demonic deception. And it's related to the UFO phenomenon. And it's the idea that there are no such things as UFOs, but people have a lot of these experiences with UFOs and alien abduction and alien visitation, but these are actually demons in disguise. And they're leading a lot of people away from traditional religious beliefs into this sort of new age, like global, one world, one universe consciousness, this new age type of consciousness, through these so-called alien visitations or UFO abductions and experiences, and teaching people that we're not an advanced civilization. We have very archaic ideas about spirituality, and we need to grow, and we need to become more spiritually advanced like they are. And so they're leading people who are, devout Christians, for example, away from these devout traditional beliefs to this global consciousness and mindfulness, and all of these kind of keywords in the modern spiritual new age era. And there's a lot of similarities between possession experiences and alien visitation and abduction experiences, and I've got a whole bunch of episodes just about that coming up. But I started to think about this because I remembered Ralph's class that I had taken about the demonic deception, and that a lot of these aliens are actually demons that are pretending to be aliens to appeal to us, and our desire for spiritual growth, because that's what they promise. And I remembered that when we were growing up, my brother had experiences in the house that none of the rest of us had, and that he had often dreamt that aliens came into his room at night. Sometimes they even took him away. And we always just thought these were bad dreams that he was having. I would have night terrors, and I would have dreams about ghosts in the house, and he would have these dreams about alien visitations. And there was something that happened when he was much older. This happened, must have been around 2004, because I remember I can see myself in the apartment we were living in at the time. I was with my daughters at the time when he called me, and my brother at the time, he was the Naval Reserves, and he called me, and he was crying. And he had been at his weekend duty at the naval base up in Great Lakes. And it was just at the time when people were starting to have text messaging on their cell phones. And he had never gotten or sent a text message yet. And he got a text alert while he was driving home on this Sunday night from the naval base. And he didn't know how to open it. So he pulls over to try and open up this text message and read it. And after a few minutes, he figures it out. He opens it up and he looks at the text message, and it says, prepare to shed your container. Prepare to shed your container. And the message had come from his old cell phone number. This was before, like, you could keep your cell phone number when you changed your carrier. So he had changed carriers, and so he had gotten a new phone number, and that phone number was no longer in service, but he had gotten this text message from that number, and it was this cryptic message. And his mind immediately shot back to all of those instances when he was little, when, he claimed that he was visited by aliens, and that there were even times they had taken him away. And he told me that he was afraid that he was going to be taken away by these things permanently, or he was going to die. And it was really disturbing for all of us. And he actually called up, I think it was Verizon was the new carrier, and or the old carrier, and they could not explain. They actually opened up this case, and they had researchers looking into this, and they could not explain how this text message had come into his phone from this account that was no longer in service. And the phone itself, the battery was dead. And this is a little weird, interesting coincidence. The phone was locked in a file cabinet in his old bedroom in my mom's house, where he still had some of his stuff, where he had gotten these visitations when he was growing up. So don't mind that spooky noise. It's just my daughter's coming home. It's not sound effects. So, when you think about all of this stuff together, and you think about, are we putting all these different names to the same phenomena? Just like we have all these names that come from Catholic theology and demonology that are used in this clinical agnostic therapy, spirit release therapy, are we also seeing all these different kinds of attachments and possessions, across the board, in alien experiences, in theological experiences, capital S spiritual experiences, and in these clinical experiences, are these all the same things? Just like last week, we were talking about, or the first week, we were talking about all these different experiences with these strange beings that different cultures have different names for, whether they're Native Americans calling them the stick Indians, or they're, Irish people calling them fairies. Or we're calling them Bigfoot. What are these all the same things that we all have different names for? And in that way, unlike in the past where comparative religions were a way of dismissing religion and religious beliefs, by saying like, oh, all different cultures believe in this myth, this kind of a myth. Now, like I said, so many more people are going like, all these different cultures have these kinds of experiences. They have these kinds of spiritual problems. They have these same kinds of ways in dealing with these spiritual problems. You can find forms of spirit release therapy in every culture all over the world. They call it a different name, and they have a different methodology, but they're all doing the same thing. They believe that there's some disembodied entity that's attached to a living human being, and they're trying to get rid of it. So a lot of questions that arise, aren't there? At any rate, that's all I have for you this evening. And so I hope you enjoyed this. If please send me your questions, your comments, angry comments, positive comments, questions, I beg to differ, all that stuff. Send it to me at ursulabielski@sbcglobal.net. Or put it down in the comments, and we'll talk about it. And I'd like to, get to the point where I get a lot of mail, and we can do a mailbag segment once in a while. So that would be cool. So please email me so we can start doing that. And I'd love to hear more about your own experiences. So please, if you've had experience with spirit attachment or spirit release therapy, hypnosis that revealed spirit attachments or things like this, please let me know about it so that I can share it with everyone else, all the details, and we can talk about it. So again, Ursula Bielski at sbcglobal.net is my email. I'll put it in the comments. I'll also put in the links to the books that I talked about and the researchers that I talked about tonight, as well as Ralph Sarchi's stuff, the movie and Ralph's book and all of that stuff. And then next week, I'm going to see you back here next week. I am not sure what we're going to be talking about, so I can't tell you that right now. I have a couple things that we're talking about. I think we might talk about some of the Marian apparitions that are being connected to, and the prophecies, Marian, Mother of God, Mary, prophecies that are being connected to what's going on in Ukraine and Russia right now, because there's some really important stuff going on in that regard, including the fact that later this month, Pope Francis is going to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, which goes back to the apparitions, some of the apparitions, big apparitions in the church, including the apparitions at Fatima, Portugal in 1917. So I think I might talk about that next week, because there's a lot of interesting things that line up there. And a lot of people are talking about it on social media right now. So I want to fill you in on that if you're not familiar with what's happening, because I think it's got a lot of appeal for everybody, not just people inside the church, because it definitely affects everybody in the world. So I think we'll probably talk about that next week. And I hope you join me for that. And please do send me your emails. And I hope you have a great night, afternoon, morning, whenever you're watching this. And thanks so much for joining me. And please share with everybody, and please ask your friends to subscribe. You please subscribe too if you haven't already. I'd love to see you back here next week. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next Thursday. Oh, and happy St. Patrick's Day.